All right, now let's see if we can get one more host-based indicator out of this piece of malware. Now, remember at the beginning I showed you that if inetsim was not running at the time that this malware was detonated, it would actually delete itself from disk. And I'm sure that there's something that we can drill into to find how that actually takes place. So let's take a look at this one right here, cmd.exe. It's got a ping command. It pipes the output to dev null, and then it actually does a delete command as well. So let's go ahead and take this command and Control-C, and we'll go back over to Procmon. So when we open up Procmon, we'll go back to the filters, and we'll actually go to the details filter. So detail, and then we'll do contains, and we'll copy in that piece of information that we took out of the strings. And we will add this, and we can also, of course, do the process name, is, and then our piece of malware, which for this instance is still malware.unknown.exe. So we can take the name of that, Control-C, copy, and then add that as the criteria. Again, nothing will be showing up in Process Monitor yet because we have not executed it. So remember that the criteria for this piece of malware to delete was to not have inetsim running. So we can think that maybe the logical flow of the program might be something like this. If this piece of malware detonates and reaches out to a given URL, and that URL does not exist, go ahead and stop what you're doing, exit out of the program, and delete yourself from disk. And that can be kind of like a kill switch for a piece of malware, where if the C2 domain for the malware is not live anymore, just exit out of the program and don't continue the execution and delete yourself from disk. So let's go ahead and see if we can coerce that to happen. Remember that we have our inetsim box over here is running right now, and if we double click on this, the actual program will just execute, and the program does not delete itself from disk. But if we go over here and we Control-C and kill inetsim, we should now have the conditions required to detonate this piece of malware and have it delete itself from disk. If we double click on this, we see that the command box opens up, and if we pay attention to Process Monitor, we should see a call to cmd.exe. The binary does delete itself from disk, and now we can drill down into the details section of Process Monitor. Now, this is very interesting because if we open this up, the binary called to command.exe to run the very string that we saw earlier in our strings output. And it turns out that when you issue this command, it will delete itself from disk after pinging for a count of 1. So that is the mechanism for the self-deletion of this binary, and we now have that as a piece of information. So again, we can take our notes here, and we'll bring this to the side, and we will take a screenshot of this, and we'll put this into our host indicators for our basic dynamic analysis. So I have just copied in this screenshot for our host indicator, and at this point, we can kind of now start to unravel the rest of the program. So we can say something like this: program execution flow. If URL exists, download favicon.ico, run favicon.ico, ico if I could type. If URL doesn't exist, delete from disk, do not run. So we have now done a very limited amount of reverse engineering to what this program may look like from a programmatic standpoint. We now know that if there is a particular URL, which remember we identified as this helpdeskbros.local/favicon.ico, if that exists, which we simulated via using inetsim as our internet simulation capability, then the piece of malware downloads favicon.ico, and there's actually another part here, writes to disk, named, and then we have the name up here, which is cr433101.dat.exe, and we can put that in here as well. And then run favicon.ico, which on disk now is called cr433101.dat.exe. And then there's another case here as well. If the URL doesn't exist, the program stops what it's doing. It does not download favicon.ico. It deletes itself from disk, and that's it. So that's our first foray into basic static and basic dynamic analysis. We took a piece of malware that we knew absolutely nothing about. We pulled some basic information about it. We used this basic information to start to look at the different network and host-based signatures, and we started to unravel what this program is capable of. And now for the rest of the course, every time we come up against a new binary that we know nothing about, we'll do a similar kind of methodology to start to tease apart what the binary is actually doing and what it's capable of. And so that wraps up our first set of basic static and basic dynamic analysis. Now, at this point, we might want to call this something else. So instead of just a generic malware, maybe this is now a dropper. And instead of unknown, why don't we call this download from URL.exe? And now we've more accurately classified what this malware is capable of and what it does. All right, and that's our first set of basic static and basic dynamic analysis. If you're sticking with me so far, great job. You've learned a little bit on how to take a look at these different pieces of malware and how to apply tools to identify what they can do. And we're going to go into more depth on different methodologies to identify different pieces of information about these binaries. So I'll see you in the next video.